My name is Adrian Cook, and this is my story of addiction, cancer, recovery, and me.
And I'm Valentina Barbacci, and I'm here to help Adrian tell his story. So today we're going to have Adrian take you through his journey, through the very first stages of becoming an alcoholic, sort of what were the telltale signs, then going up to the first cancer diagnosis and talking about sort of his losses through addiction. And eventually we'll go into the stages of rehabilitation, cancer treatment, including the various trials, and most importantly, the end-of-life diagnosis. That was a very pivotal moment in his life. The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We are not medical professionals, although we have and will at times consult medical professionals. The content shared is based on our personal experience and research. This is Adrian's story from his perspective. So, Adrian, let's get started. How are you feeling?
Okay, good. Yourself?
Good. Yeah.
Good to hear.
Great. Okay, so if we think back to sort of years ago, right? This journey of yours started years ago, not from birth. Let's not go back that far.
You say that. But,
yeah. Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into that. There's that lineage thing.
It all starts from birth,
yeah.
Pre-birth even. But if we can just bring the audience up to date here with sort of what to you were the telltale signs that you were an addict. And, looking back now, you have a different perspective. But back then, what would you say your life looked like?
Okay, well, I guess the realization that I had a problem initially was where there's that big word dependency come into play. So you're using a substance to get through a situation. A crutch, as they say. That's what they predominantly call it. So in my instance, it was predominantly business related. I basically ended up in a sales role, and that sales role was quite demanding. There were targets, etc., and I had to step outside of my comfort zone and do something that I didn't really feel too happy about doing. It's basically, I believed, put it that way, that I had to present myself in a way that would please others, or it's that people-pleasing thing, which is, again, typical trait within addiction. Yeah. And I realised that I had to put on, I thought as much anyway, that I had to put a facade on to close that deal, So I would use, initially started off with maybe just one or two drinks, maybe just one drink initially, just to soften the blow. Dutch courage, as they call it.
Right.
Step into a room with someone, and not so much be demanding, but have the confidence, which is at the end of the day, what it's all about. Have the confidence to say, how do I win this business? Or I'm not taking no for an answer. I want to walk away from here today with an order. Right. Stuff that doesn't sit very well with me, because usually with me, if someone says to me, no, I'm not interested, I would walk away, but you can't do that in this game. Right. So that's where, I started to use a substance, a crutch, to help make those situations somewhat easier.
Yeah. And do you feel that it was, kind of just the environment that you were in that sort of led you down that path? Or do you think that any environment would have made you feel uncomfortable? Because it's interesting that we talk about the marketing, the advertising space. And it is very common to just, as you've said, go out for a drink, happy hour starts at 5:00, 4 for some, But do you think that kind of being that social element was just generally not comfortable and natural to you? So it would have been any kind of social setting? Or do you think that particular work environment?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But I'd say predominantly it was within that work environment. Dealing with people that you don't know, it's the irony is here, I guess, is that people buy people. And that's what, as I said, to kind of touch on, is what my partner said to me, it's sell yourself, which I didn't have the confidence in myself to do so. So hence, why I used a substance to give me that confidence. Whereas in a more kind of personal environment, socializing with friends, etc., then you're predominantly yourself anyway to a degree. It's a lot easier to have a kind of an open conversation with a friend about someone, albeit you may well be putting on a facade to fit within that environment.
Exactly.
But
peer pressure.
Yeah, but there's not a need as such to get something over the line. Yeah. Whereas with work, it was, there's targets to hit. You've got to come away with something. You can't take no for an answer. There's all that stuff that's drummed into you that you're obviously trying to work around. You're trying to think, well, what do I do? How do I do that? What is it that I can bring to the table to make that easier for myself? And it just so happened to be substance.
Yeah. And obviously looking back now, you have hindsight 2020, but at the time, would you say you were aware of that?
Yeah. Okay. I think initially I didn't.
You were aware of the addiction?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't so much addiction, but I was aware that there was a niggle to say that, this isn't right. Okay. But because of how far down the rabbit hole I had gone with regards to this position, that I just felt that was more important at that time, of course. Certainly not now when I look back, but yeah, at that time I thought, well, look, this is a necessity. It's not going to do me any harm. It's a drink just to get me through. But of course, that one drink turns to two, and yes, your body becomes more used to it. Then that two becomes three, and so on and so forth. Because before you know it, and that's the thing with addiction, it creeps up on you. It's not something that's sort of premeditated. It's not something you think, oh, hang on, I've gradually increased it. Well, you might do. You might be aware that, you're having more than one, or more than two, maybe three, a bottle of wine, whatever it might be. Yes, you do see the increase, but you don't actually realise that you're falling into addiction. It creeps up. It's not until it's too late that the penny drops. By that time, you're in the depths of it.
Yeah. Well, certainly your bill will tell you.
Yeah.
But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a big thing.
But in terms of the environment outside of work, I'd love to kind of get into a sense of, other people around you, family, friends, peers, colleagues outside of work, if you socialize at all. Tell me what it was like, sort of, because I think it's so easy, particularly in certain cultures where drinking is just par for the course, right? And drinking a lot. We're not just talking about having a casual drink with dinner. We're talking about having quite a lot to drink. A lot is relative to each person, but let's say several per day, right? That can add up pretty quickly, but it also can just feel normal because, in New York City, you go bar hopping. In London, you go out for drinks and then dinner and then more drinks. And it's just all quite normal, right?
Yeah.
So tell me what that environment was like for you as a professional or even growing up,
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's a good point with regards to the amount that you're drinking over the course of a day. And when you do the math and you think, well, actually, I've had 3 or 4 drinks a day, that's quite normal. Then that, when you assess it like that, and this is where the mind plays havoc, is because it's always you've got the devil on one side, an angel on the other. If you can think of it that way, constantly talking in your ear about what is right and what is wrong. And I'm afraid to say that it's usually the devil that wins in that one. Yeah. It always justifies a reason for it. Yeah. But yeah, it's I guess it's just that whole stigma of having to play a role within a certain environment, whether that be with friends or whether that be business. As I say, the friend environment is somewhat softer. It's a lot easier to be more of yourself. But I did realise more in recent years that I wasn't being myself. I was still playing a role to fit in around, because I thought that's what people wanted me to be like. Oh, here's Adrian, this is what Adrian does. Yeah. Whereas in my heart of hearts, I could walk away from that and come home and think, well, did I have a good night? Or did so-and-so, my alter ego, have a good night?
Right.
That kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah. And did anybody in your life at that point, or in the years leading up to the cancer diagnosis, did anybody pull you aside at any point and say, "Hey, I see you're drinking quite a lot," or did anybody indicate anything out of the ordinary?
Well, I think the mirror could be a good friend or an enemy, depending on your mindset. But having a good long look in that mirror and saying, are you well? Are you doing the right thing? Really did bring it home to me. But yeah, there was some rumblings around in the background. My first wife, there were certain traits that she noticed within me, staying up later, having, a glass of wine before I actually went and sat down and had drunk another glass of wine with her. So I get in from work after I'd already had a few, because that was part of the process, entertaining someone, because used to make the excuse, well, let's go out, go and have a bit of lunch, or quite often it would be in the evening, 5, 6 o'clock, we'll go and have a few beers after work, and I can hopefully try and close the deal that way, soften the blow.
So soften the blow. So you go after work.
Yeah, exactly. So come home, then you pour myself a glass, drink that before I even went, and then pour another one straight out, then went back and sat down. So so there were a few telltale signs, some obvious things that she'd pick up on. Then again, as things started to deteriorate and, you become more dependent, then obviously some more things start to creep into play, and it becomes more obvious.
Yeah.
You stop doing certain things that you was doing. You become a bit more complacent. You're irritable. Yeah. All of these kind of, things that kind of jump out that are different to your normal behaviour that certainly got picked up on.
And do you think there was any particular reason, if we think about the transition from sort of being a very common role in society, which is sort of the functioning alcoholic. If we talk about, many people can drink heavily and still show up to work on time and take care of their family and their kids. And so it's quite acceptable to drink a lot as long as you're still showing up, right?
Absolutely,
for work, for people around you, etc. But it's still not healthy. So can you talk to me about sort of that transition from drinking heavily, still being a functioning alcoholic, to then at the point where it was like, no, this is really too much? And at what point, if any, did you become aware of that excess?
Do you know, obviously I can't remember, going back a long time now, and there's a lot of grey area.
Yeah, sure.
There's a lot of what they call blackouts along the way.
Sure.
It's worth mentioning, but what they mean by blackout. Blackout doesn't mean that you pass out, right, and you're out cold there on the floor or wherever you might be. Blackout means that you drink to the point where you are still functioning, but you can't remember.
Right.
And there's all sorts of things that happen during blackout that people don't know what they've done, but it's 99 times out of 100, it's very detrimental. I think it's fair to say there's one key moment when I was getting ready to go to a meeting once. And I can remember saying to myself at that point, Adrian, if you don't stop, or if you don't start cutting back, there was never a stop, because it's just not part of our dialogue. But it was always, you've got to, if you don't take stock of where you are with your drinking and slow things down, you're going to have a problem. Mm. And unbeknown to me at that point, I already had a problem. Yeah, because it become part of my everyday practice. Yeah. Drink to act to, to be able to do what is necessary to get over the line what needs to be done. Yeah. So I that was certainly one time that jumps out at me to know that there was a problem. But I think it's not until you get to the point where it's uncontrollable, where it becomes not so much a habit, but a necessity. Yeah. So you find you're getting up, and just to start functioning, you talk about the functioning alcoholic, but literally to be able to put one foot in front of the other, you need a drink. That was when I knew I was in trouble. Yeah.
Yeah. And would you say that you had the understanding or the wherewithal at that moment to make a change? Or would you say that you just kind of had that thought and then went on?
Then carried on, yeah.
Yeah.
I had that thought which lasted, I don't know. I mean, I say that's probably not fair. It was there. Yeah. It was always that niggle. Yeah. Because, as I said, going
subconscious
back to,
almost.
Exactly. Yeah. That subconscious thing saying this isn't right.
It's the angel somewhere deep down saying,
there you go. It's that
gotta stop.
Angel and
the devil going,
yeah,
you're
listen. Fine.
You'll be fine.
Yeah, you're
Everyone
getting
else
through.
does it.
Exactly.
Everyone else does it. They're fine.
And
no
they are. Yeah, to a degree, everyone does. I mean,
a lot of people.
A lot of people do. There's a lot of heavy drinkers, and there's a big difference between a heavy drinker and an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not completely up to speed with the science behind this, but there's a lot, that's why you see that addiction runs rife in family, because they talk about lineage or, genetics, where it does get passed down. You might find that, uncles, aunties, cousins, in my instance, my brother was alcoholic. In fact, alcoholism in my family is rife. Whether it's uncles, aunties, granddads, all sorts, across the spectrum is addiction is rife. Yeah. So, as I say, there is a big difference between a heavy drinker and an alcoholic, because this is only from my experiences and what I've learned on this journey, is that, you are born an addict. It's part. I think
your brain is wired a certain way.
You're wired that way. It's the overthinking. It's the certain traits that that they talk about within the rooms. Rooms are talking about AA, meetings, etc. It's that not good enough, or putting boundaries in place. It's people pleasing. Yeah. These are typical traits of an addict. Yeah. And there's that. That's why they say in the rooms, look for the similarities, and that you will find that there's a lot of similarities, around those kind of, emotions and feelings and necessities of behaviors, I guess.
Yeah. How much do you think is nature versus nurture? If we're talking about your family around you, right, growing up, that would have been a combination of both, right? You have both your parents who were already both alcoholics or both users,
But my mum, my dad's passed now, bless him. Yes. But my dad liked to drink. Okay. But my dad wasn't a heavy drinker. Okay. My mum loves a glass of wine. Sure. And in fact,
as do I.
There you go. But with my mum, I do believe it's slightly different, because once my mum has opened the bottle, she will have to finish it.
It has to be finished. Yeah.
That's typical addict behaviour. Yeah. Whereas my wife is, she's a drinker. Yeah. She likes a few glasses of wine of an evening.
But she can put a cork in it.
She'll put a cork in it, and she'll have a dinner, and she'll move away. Yeah. Where that to me is insanity. How can you leave half a glass of wine on the side? That with an addict's world, that doesn't happen.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. The reason I ask is because, I'm half Italian, half American, and I can certainly see, I appreciate the fact that in Italy, we don't see alcohol as a tool or crutch to be abused in any way. In fact, we're taught from a very young age to honor it, respect it, enjoy it, appreciate it, right? And it's very much, part of it is you just get really good quality wine in Italy, for very affordable prices. So you could easily abuse it because it's affordable, right? But at the same time, there's a craftsmanship that comes with it. There's a level of deep pride, right, that comes with it. So we were taught from a young age to appreciate it, sip it, enjoy it, draw it out almost a little bit. Whereas I'm not so sure that in my American side we do as much. There's definitely the heavy drinking element of, and I don't want to sort of lambast all Americans, because there's certainly plenty who are, not heavy drinkers and certainly non-alcoholics. But I think there is, growing up at least, from what I experienced, this heavy drinking culture from underage, because we don't get our license and ability to drink until we get the license at 16, 17, whatever, but the ability to drink we don't technically have until we're 21, which is quite late if you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so you have this dichotomy between, okay, we're not allowed to drink until we're 21, but that's pretty unrealistic. So let's just all go do it in the woods. And you have keg stands, parties, and you're just drinking yourself silly at a young age. And so there's much more this desire to go and do it, hidden in the woods. And it does, I think, breed a certain amount of alcoholism, because you're not taught to do it from a young age responsibly, like we are in Italy. You're sort of almost, it's quite acceptable to just go and drink with your friends in the woods and make sure you don't get caught.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I find this cultural dynamic quite important. And again, not being English, I don't want to lambast the English, but from what I've experienced in my 14 years of being here, it's more similar to the American culture, and that it's perfectly fine to drink a lot. It's in fact considered almost abnormal to refuse a drink. People will say, "Are you okay? Are you on medication?"
There's that peer pressure that goes with
that. So talk to me about that in your experience, growing up. What sort of level of peer pressure was around you, and or what what it was, what felt just normal to you growing up in your family environment.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, I mean, my family environment was a pretty safe one. It was a very healthy environment. I can remember quite clearly weekends, Sundays especially, was, everyone down the pub, lunchtime, typical British Sunday afternoon. Mum and Dad used to have quite a few, come back pretty wasted on many an occasion. That was quite normal for me. Yeah. But then that's quite, again, I think that's a really good point you raised about the cultural differences on how, or certainly with regards to alcohol between, other parts of Europe, the Mediterranean, as opposed to what it is here. Because when we was out, we used to travel to Spain a hell of a lot. And Dad had a place out there, and you could even of an evening, we would sit down, we'd go for a meal, we would have a few drinks to start, the meal would come up, you'd have your meal and maybe a few more drinks afterwards, and then you would make your exit, and you'd either move on to another bar, continue drinking, or go back to the apartment or whatever, and continue from there. Pretty much done and dusted within the space of two hours. Whereas, as you rightly say, within the Mediterranean cultures in Italy, Spain, France, etc., they'll come out at 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night with all the little ones with them, and they'll sit there till the early hours of the morning, cruising through their dinner, nice and have they'll do a bottle of wine between the table. Right. And that, a glass of wine to them is...
They'll nurture a half glass for 3 hours.
Absolutely,
for
exactly.
An hour or two,
and it's a completely different mindset, completely different culture. It's more respected. Yeah. Whereas I don't want to be, too... But exactly. And, but I'm painting an overall picture here, but I'm not... I don't want to kind of put a stigma behind it with regards to our culture as such. But there is... I think it's fair to say that, I think the age difference, or rather the age limits, do make a difference. As you rightly say, 21 in America, when kids get 16, 17, they're getting into their adulthood, they want to be doing what adults are doing. And of course, if there's a rule against it, then arguably that's going to give more motivation to go against the grain, so to speak, sort of about rebellion, that kind of thing. But
and I think it's a really good point, and none of this is intended to be disparaging towards any one culture. The idea is to shed light on sort of the differences that we experience as youth around drinking culture.
Exactly.
Right? Sort of how do we educate the youth on what is responsible drinking versus irresponsible drinking? And it's not about judgment, it's just about saying, hey, just be careful, because this could lead to something pretty difficult and challenging later on down the line if you don't know sort of how to handle it.
Yeah, absolutely,
So then moving on and thinking about, okay, so that was sort of the environment growing up, and I think quite common, right? Like I can certainly relate to a lot of what you just said, and certainly have seen it and witnessed it. Tell me about sort of how do you get to the point where you've got this job and you've got a lot of pressure on you, and you kind of in the back of your head, you see that, you feel that something's not quite right, both in terms of the facade and the mask you have to put on every day to go to work, and then also in terms of the amount that you are drinking to cope with that, right? And at what point, did the cancer diagnosis come in, and how, what did that journey look like?
Yeah, well, I think it's quite a difficult one, because I think when I was first initially diagnosed, my mindset is obviously in a completely different place to where it is today. Obviously, bearing in mind it's second round of what's the word I'm looking for? Diagnosis. Yeah. Whereas the first time, I was quite ignorant and understanding. I think that's only fair to say that it's quite to be expected. I never knew too much about skin cancer. I didn't know how. I was just thinking that it's a mole. If it's cancerous, they remove that, and that's the end of it. I didn't know how actually dangerous skin cancer was not so much in its early stages, but if it metastasizes, and what that means is for the cancer to spread and generally go internally and start even to the blood and start affecting the organs and whatnot, or bones and everything else. So that, and when that happens, going back to when I was initially diagnosed, at that point, there was no treatment for metastasized skin cancer. Immunotherapy wasn't even invented then.
Right.
So
we're talking about sort of 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
15 years ago.
Around about
Almost
15 years ago, yeah. And at that point, albeit I was drinking quite heavily, but I wasn't in the true grip of addiction.
Right.
It wasn't at that stage. I can't think of any moment when I reflect back on that time that association between the two. There wasn't anything that thought, crikey, I've got cancer, I need to forget about this, I need to go and drink. That there was never that association. But I think subconsciously there was more going on.
Okay.
I think there was something within me that affected me a lot more than I initially thought, and it didn't kind of come into play until months, if not maybe a couple of years later.
Fair enough.
After I'd gone through that whole process of diagnosis, which was a diagnosis of, yes, you have skin cancer. We need to do further exploratory work. I have to take more skin away from around that area to make sure that they've got all the cells initially. And then...
So sorry, just to expand on that a moment. So it started off with sort of mapping, right?
So the mole mapping come after diagnosis. So basically, so it all come around, whereas I had a mole on my back, which was irritating me.
Okay.
And this went on for months. Yep, just the one, quite a big one on my back, but it changed shape. It was quite angry looking, and it was itching me like mad, to be honest. Yeah. And it was my wife at the time. She said, this isn't right. You need to get that looked at. Well, the rest is history, really. But
how long would you say it had been there for, or it had been?
Bothering you for? Probably since birth, but I don't.
Sorry, I meant in terms of the itching and changing, changing shape,
months. I kept putting it off. Again, because of my ignorance to the whole melanoma scenario.
Sure.
I so much ignored it, but as a lot, I think it's fair to say, a lot of people get a bit dismissive, probably a bit of fear behind that. That will go, or let's not go there. That's not that. And even if it is, then we'll just get rid of it and we'll carry on. So put that to one side for now, and we'll just carry on doing what we're doing, and we'll see what happens with it.
I'm going to sound really sexist here, but I think that's a particularly male trait.
I think you might well be right. Yeah.
I'm going to get lambasted for that, but I'm just going to put it out there.
I think that's a fair one.
I think that's a quite common.
I think so.
Yeah.
So they went through the process of removing the moles, did the further incisions, as they call it, and then when going through that process, they actually realised that one of the moles, which was the one on my back, because I actually had 4 removed. I think it's worth noting here that I had 4 taken away because the one on the back, they were pretty damn sure at that point that was cancerous. Yeah. They had all the telltale signs, but there's three others.
Changing of shape, changing, exactly.
One on my head, on the top of my head, one on my ankle.
Okay. So by this time there were several.
Yeah, there were several. So they thought, we're going to take these off anyway, and we'll get them biopsied and checked to make sure that they're all okay.
Right.
Well, they all came back as cancerous, all of them. So that's when kind of it went, right, okay, now we've got to do something. We've got to do something, further incisions. And one of the moles, the one that's on your back, is over a few millimeters thick. And these things are like almost like their own living organism. Right. And they have like a root system to them now, which I'm guessing that's what, and I'm guessing here, again, this is just, what I've kind of, my understanding is along the way. But that root system, if that keeps growing and grows into the bloodstream or gets into the bloodstream and it has cancerous cells, then that's when it metastasizes. There's that word again. Right. Basically, it spreads. Once it gets into that bloodstream, it can go anywhere. And that's what they were fearful of, because it was that big. You know, it was that deep, I should say. So so they said, right, we need to MRIs, CTs, scans, basically, just to make sure that, you know, there's every chance, I should say, that this has spread into the system. Now, they didn't, I suppose maybe they didn't want to scare, you know, any scaremongering going on. They didn't want to worry me too much, but they never made it clear.
How serious?
Yeah, because, as I say, there was no treatment.
Interesting.
And the prognosis, I think, is if it has metastasized at that time, you've got months. No, 6 months to a year, I think, something like that.
Interesting.
But I didn't quite know that at that point. But I do. Obviously, it's still, you know, this isn't great.
Right.
And I remember having the scans and everything was all fine. Previous to that, even having the biopsies done and all of that, still mindset was fine. I was in a pretty good place.
Okay.
Life was just carried on as normal. But it wasn't until we were waiting for the scans results that the fear started to creep in.
Okay.
That's where I started to do a bit more
anticipation,
due diligence as well, into skin and what's what. And that's where I thought, okay, this could be a little bit more serious than what we thought.
Okay.
And now my drinking habits didn't change, not at this point. But once I had sat down with a consultant, they said, right, we've got your scan results back, albeit this was about 6-8 weeks later. So there was quite a considerable amount of waiting time. And I know that some damage was done then. Now I look back in hindsight, I can see that's when things started to change mentally for me on this journey. And they said, right, the good news is it's not spread. It's not metastasized. So we've got it early. You're okay. And I can remember the feeling, which I'm sure a lot out there can sympathise with, is that kind of blanket, kind of warm blanket put around you. But in the same breath, there's that comfort, but there's also that fear of what might have been or what could be in the future. You know, will it come back? Or, you know, there's that seed of doubt is then sown. Yeah. And that stays with you. You
can take a momentary breath, but you can't completely relax.
No, exactly. You're always on guard. You're always, you know, and that from an addict's perspective, because we are overthinkers, you know, we are not so much looking at things all constantly from a negative perspective. You're always challenging everything.
Right.
You know, you're not good enough. If you don't do this more and more, then that's not going to work. There's that kind of knock-on effect that you're always trying to, you know, keep ahead of the game. And, you know, this.
Do you think that helped you in a way?
Absolutely now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's pros and cons to that. But again, I suppose as we go through this story, then that will become more apparent. But at that time, it was kind of, okay, well, I've got the all clear, which is brilliant. I can carry on now. But I always thought that
you were second guessing.
Yeah, this could come back.
The constant second guessing of your own personality led to the second guessing of, okay, is it really all clear?
Yeah, and what happens if they've taken 4 moles away?
Yeah,
you know, and I'm as my boys are, and my daughter as well. We're all smothered. You know,
yeah.
You know, we're covered in the things, and they said to me, like, well, what we need to do is obviously you're quite high risk.
Okay.
You know, we need to start.
By smothered, you mean born with them? You know, as in like you've all been born with several.
Predominantly on my back. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, there's. They could do dot to dot on my back.
Okay, so this is facing the diagnosis then.
Yeah, yeah. So after that point, you know, started to get just back into the swing of things.
Yeah.
As I say, I had to go for the further incisions. I had all that done. This was all going on when I was having the scans, etc., and all of that done. Waiting for the results, I was still having further incisions done.
Yeah.
And then even after the event, you know, even when they got the all clear.
And these incisions, sorry, just to clarify for the audience, these are incisions to remove the moles. Is that what you're saying?
That's right, yeah. It's not so much, to remove the moles initially and then to take further area away around where that mole, so like a couple of inches either side. So,
so to ensure it's really clear.
To make sure that they've got any cell damage, you know, removed.
Again, to prevent it from going into the bloodstream.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, you know, the key thing there. So, so that's obviously that's what they did, and then they've said, right, well, now we need to keep you constantly monitored, and if anything is unusual or we see any slight changes, then we'll remove them. It's a very simple process. We get it early enough. We just literally, you're in the clinic in the morning, 20 minutes and you're back out again.
Okay.
And I had that, probably that was on and off for, when I say on, it wasn't really off. It was predominantly on for about 3 years.
And how many would you say? How many instances of incisions?
Probably 40 to 50.
Wow, that's a lot.
Precautionary ops done. And this, at that time, was when, because I was constantly, back and forth to the clinic, probably once a month. That's where my work started to slip slightly, and I started to use more.
Yeah. The pressure was elevated.
Exactly.
To keep performing.
Yeah. And I didn't really notice so much at this point. That, again, going back to that, I think it's not until after the, till the
hindsight 2020.
Exactly. That you realise that there is a real problem. But it did start to increase.
It was a coping mechanism at this point, helping you get through the pressure of facing a cancer diagnosis and recovery, stage of recovery, and then also facing continued pressure at work that was already uncomfortable.
Absolutely, yeah.
2 levels of discomfort, of significant discomfort too.
Yeah. Well, I was off work initially after the where they did the final, the other work where they removed further. There is a name for, I can't remember the actual terminology, but anyhow, for example, the one on my ankle, there's not really any skin there, so they had to do a very large incision and take a skin graft and to replace it, and then I had to wear a boot for 8 weeks.
Wow.
So again, all of this stuff was pushing me further back away. I was losing the grip on the company because I had my own company.
Yeah.
A consultancy that I was running at the time, and that started to slip.
Okay.
And that's kind of where I started to use a bit more. I started to start working from home. That just wasn't happening properly, and then clients started to ask quite a few questions.
Yeah.
And and things kind of started to really start to snowball, I think, from there.
So at this point, have you made any significant lifestyle changes in terms of diet, nutrition, exercise, other lifestyle arrangement? Nothing. Okay.
No, nothing.
Did any doctors?
I probably got worse.
Because of the pressure.
Yeah.
And before you go into the sort of how and why, did any doctors or medical professionals suggest that you do that? Make any significant lifestyle changes? None of them.
No.
Nobody advised.
No, that's a good point. No, not at that stage. Not
interesting.
I think it was because, albeit I was high risk, of that they were on top of it. So it hasn't metastasized. You're being constantly monitored. If anything comes up out of the ordinary, we'll just deal with it there and then. And you carry on as usual. So
no explanation of sort of how or where this could have come from or stemmed from?
Well, the usual kind of suggestions around this, because no one particularly knows, but it's sun damage. Conversation that we will go on to in more depths.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's worth a whole separate discussion.
Because, there's talk of actual what's in sunscreen itself, and ironically, is the preventative more than doing more damage than the cure, so to speak.
Which one's better, the sun for vitamin D or the sunscreen to prevent you from burns? And both have their pros and cons, and
exactly
that are not sufficiently addressed.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they're even saying now about wearing sunglasses is very detrimental because it doesn't let some of those really important rays through to the retina that helps with healing and absorbing vitamins. So again, there was no education or kind of suggestions around it. No one said to me, right, so you need to stay well, you need to start looking after yourself a bit more. You need to be exercising. You need to be considering these food groups, not considering these food groups.
Right.
Except none of that took place. And to be fair, how can I put this? I think my mindset was at the stage that I'm in their hands. They're looking after me. I don't have to worry. Right. Let them worry.
Right.
I'll just do what I've got to do.
Do as you're told.
Yeah, I'll just do what I've got to do. But unbeknown to me, I was already on that slippery slope.
Yeah.
I was dressing it up and talking the talk, but subconsciously and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, this isn't right.
There should be more to this.
Yeah, there should be a bit more to this. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you go from this mole mapping, then removal, and this sort of healing stage, but you're ultimately given the all clear.
Exactly.
And so there's a level of I can breathe.
Yeah.
But then there's also this niggle in the back of your head of is it really gone, or will it ever really be gone, or what else could I or should I be doing? Although that's not necessarily conscious. So take me through to the sort of next phase of of the diagnosis.
Absolutely, with regards to that fear of it coming back. But I think it's fair to say that kind of depleted or dissolved, or whatever way you want to word it, after a couple of years, because I had the all clear for best part of 10 years.
Wow.
So within that time frame, albeit I was getting worse in other ways, which we'll come on to, but the cancer was kind of got pushed to the back.
Okay.
There was still the niggle.
Yeah.
There's still what if kind of scenario.
But once you reach 10 years, it's kind of like, must be fine.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly. They've done what they needed
must have
to
beaten
do.
this, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All good.
Every mole that had a problem is gone. So as long as, I keep going in for a checkup every sort of 3 years, whatever it might be. Again, it's that mentality of they know best, let them deal with it kind of scenario. So
then what next? So at what point did that all change?
Basically the second diagnosis. So which was, I had no idea whatsoever. I didn't, I was basically clearing snow off of the driveway and I couldn't breathe. And it was literally to the point, it was like running 100 meters for each kind of shovel.
Just out of nowhere.
Yeah, just out of nowhere. One day. Got up, fixed snow, studied, and I thought, this just doesn't feel right. I feel like I've just run 100 meters, that much out of breath, and I've just done 2 shovels of snow. So it's not like me. So anyway, I ignored it for best part of a couple of weeks, and then in the end, I had to go to A&E. I collapsed, and I was taken into A&E.
You collapsed where?
At home.
Wow.
And then I was driven to. I didn't get the ambulance wasn't called or anything, but I was taken to A&E anyhow. And
so wait, just take me through that. That's quite a pivotal moment, a dramatic moment. I mean, you've collapsed in the driveway. Somebody was there. Somebody found you.
Yeah. Well, it was so. The scenario where, or rather, the time when I was doing this, that was a week prior.
2 weeks before.
Yeah, a couple of weeks prior to actually going to A&E.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until that gradually the breathing got worse.
Yeah.
And then one day I was back at home.
At home, okay.
Yeah, I was back at home and I collapsed at home. Yeah,
okay.
I was with somebody at the time, and they just drove me straight to A&E, and then basically as soon as they looked at my histology, they knew.
Wow.
They said, after a bit of to-in and fro-in, they said, Adrian, we need to run more tests, but it looks like, your cancer could be back and it's in your lung, which is what's caused the lungs to basically try to defend themselves and releasing fluid. And that's, so basically both my lungs had filled with fluid, and I think it was only 10% of one lung was actually working, which is why
hence the breathing.
Yeah, there's no oxygen in the system at all. So that was obviously the process of round 2.
Wow.
And that's when obviously we at that point we knew that it had metastasized.
So you're taken in, you're given this diagnosis, and had they realized how much it had spread that quickly right away, or had they just observed it or found it in the lungs?
No, they knew, but at that point they knew it was just in the lung. There was just one tumor that was in the lung.
Okay.
So basically they said, right, okay, well we're going to, obviously the first thing we need to do is drain the fluid from the lungs, which is absolutely horrendous. I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
Right.
But they had to do that to get me breathing again.
Yeah.
And then after all of that process was done, I was in hospital for I think it was about 12 weeks in total. And then coming towards the end of that time, is then obviously then when we sat down and told what the next steps would be. But there is no cure, but with responding to treatment, then you could quite well have a healthy 10 years. If you kind of, if things go to plan and you look after yourself or, whatever that might be, then there's every chance that, you'll make that term. But also something to consider, which was a kind of a big, at that initial knockings was during that time frame, medicine is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
So there's every chance that by
this
the
is
time...
a good 10 years later.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We're talking sort of 5 years ago now.
Yeah, exactly. So
4 or
by
5.
this, fortunately enough, which was, quite something, was the fact that a drug called immunotherapy had been,
developed and
exactly
started, dispersed, being used.
Being used in the treatment of metastatic melanoma. So there was
came out around the early 2010s, I think. We established,
exactly,
right?
Yeah, that's it. We got that. So there, we knew that there was a treatment. As I said, when I was first diagnosed 10 years plus prior, there was nothing.
Right.
But now at least there was a treatment. So straight away I hung my coat on that. Great. They'll treat me. I'll respond to the treatment, and then I'll be fine. And then I'll stay on that for however many years, and then a new treatment will come out, then they'll put me on that, and then eventually they'll find a cure, and then happy days, be back to normal once again.
And was that the case?
Unfortunately not, no. No, it wasn't.
We laughed, but it wasn't funny, I'm sure.
Well, it was, it's a bit of a... We've spoke about this quite a few times, haven't we? About how you can't put a finger on how you feel as such. There's so many different emotions flying around, and your mindset is all over the place. It's very difficult to focus, but you can't explain exactly how you feel. Certainly not in the latter stages of diagnosis. But all I understood at that point was, we're going to start the treatment. We'll start you on a new immunotherapy drug, funny enough, that we're just trialling at the moment. But we would like to put you on that because we feel that with your makeup, there's going to be every success, which is what they did. So they started me on that with chemo tablets. By the time this is important to note, is that by the time I'd started treatment, which is probably, bearing in mind I had to recover from the procedures that I've gone through, i.e. the drainage and
the drainage of your lungs,
all of that stuff. So
how long did that take to recover?
Crikey, about 6 weeks.
Okay,
it's quite something.
So a good month and a half.
Yeah, absolutely. But by the time we'd got onto treatment, the cancer had already spread. So I ended up, at that point, I had, I think, 6 tumours in the lung and 2 or 3 in the liver at that point.
Okay.
As when we started treatment. So that's when they put me on a drug called spartamizumab, but which was a bit of a weird one. Don't ask me why. I never even asked a question, to be honest with you. Now I look back, I should have done, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I never asked any questions of, why this drug, or, what the alternatives, or, I just as again.
And was it a tried and this wasn't a trial? This was a known.
Well, it was a trial. Yeah. This
is an important detail.
Yeah,
so this is the sort of the first trial you were put on,
exactly.
And it was the trial of spartamizumab with the chemotherapy. With chemotherapy tablets.
Yeah, exactly. Now the chemo, these are a bit of a funny one.
So talk to us about one and then the other. So first the chemotherapy tablets.
Yeah. So the chemo tablets are, as far as I'm aware, but someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but they're generally given as like a blanket approach to most patients, because they have a proven shelf life of, I think it's between 9 and 12 months. So they work. They basically, for whatever cancer, certainly in line with what I was being treated for, it's proven that it does work, but they have a shelf life of 9 to 12 months.
So they send it into remission. They don't necessarily remove it entirely.
No, they don't.
So they can buy you time, and they can certainly help you significantly reduce, eliminate potentially. But for up to 9 to 12 months.
Exactly.
So after 9 to 12 months, what happens?
So they stop working, and the cancer will come back. So they're proven to reduce the size of the tumours. But as I say, once that shelf life has expired, everything comes back.
So what is the purpose of that 9 to 12 months? To sort of buy you time to address it through other means? Hence why you were given Spartomycia.
Again, I'm going to be honest, that's a really good question. I should have asked, and I didn't.
Okay, and we'll get a medical professional on to talk to us about that.
Well, there we go, yeah. And that's I think that's...
no, because it's an important point, right?
Is.
So, and I bring this up because, again, not being a medical professional, but doing the reading about health and well-being and cancer, right? We in the UK alone, we have had... in the 1.5 years since, let's say between 2022 and beginning of 2022 to middle of 2023, I think end of 2023, we had a 40% increase in cancer. And the point being that a lot of people are going to be dealing and facing a cancer diagnosis, not just here in the UK, right? So globally. And we have to grapple both with the severity of that diagnosis, the causes of of cancer, of disease. And so I think it's really important that we understand also that, and I'll probably get in trouble for this, but it's important to note also that chemotherapy is really only effective 10% of the time, right? Give or take plus or minus 5%, they say. And I'll put both references in the comments section to properly quote the sources. But I think it's a really important point, right? And I'm not trying to say don't do chemotherapy or don't trust it, but I think this stage that you were in where you sort of trusted the doctors, right, is one that we will all at some point either find ourselves in or our relatives in. And it's really important for us to understand what our actual chances are and understand that we can't just sort of put our hands up and trust that it's all going to work. We also have to most likely bring a more holistic approach to health and well-being if we want to.
I certainly think I certainly think it's worth investigating.
Yeah.
I mean, again, at that point, I had no idea. And I just I was just doing purely as I was told.
Yeah, sure, of course.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, you're not a medical professional, so why would you do otherwise? You trust the doctors.
You trust them, and they tell you what
and they are there to help you, and they're trying their best.
Absolutely, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah,
I think obviously you're underneath a team of consultants. Yeah. You would like to think they've got your best interests at heart. Mm-hmm. So of course, you're going to trust their judgment. But I just think it's not a fail-proof. No, it's
approach.
Not, and I think it's really important,
especially given the numbers of those who unfortunately have not survived cancer. So we have to look.
Plenty along my journey.
Yeah,
got some really good friends that I've lost along the way, and I think because I guess the point I'm trying to make here is, yes, you're going to have that trust. It's important that you, to a degree, that you have that. You rely on their judgment. That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
If they tell you to do something, they tell you to jump out, you say how high.
Yeah.
But in the same breath, I think it's massively important that you know yourself.
Yeah.
And you do your own research.
And you do a bit of introspection
into
what in your environment, whether that's diet, nutrition, habits, drinking habits, as we talked about, other social habits, what other levels of exposure to toxins and toxicity do we have? And we'll go into that a bit more in detail. But I'd love to just at this stage in your journey, was any of this even a glimmer? Again, going back to that question of, did you have the awareness then that you needed to change something, or was it still no this treatment's going to work?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah, 101%. As I say, I trusted in the journey. I trusted in the treatment
and
the drug, and obviously the people that are administering those drugs, and rightly so. I mean, they were brilliant, and I've got nothing but, I give thanks to them every day. They're always in my prayers. They're wonderful people, and they've done the best by me. I strongly believe that. But in the same breath, I want to use that phrase again, is that I also believe that there's a lot that if it's not proven or it hasn't been had a box ticked by the science profession, then it's not necessarily considered.
Yeah.
But I strongly, especially now,
Yeah.
101% believe that it's important that you step outside of that comfort zone.
Yeah.
You do your own due diligence.
Yeah.
Understand the body.
Learn,
learn,
ask
listen.
questions.
Absolutely. Step out, as I say, think outside the box.
Yeah.
And having those conversations with your consultant may not necessarily be, I'm not saying not to, but it didn't add any value to my journey, put it that way, because I won't say they were dismissive, but, and I do understand this to a degree, is because if it's not proven, then they can't really give that as advice. They can't say, well, go and do that.
Their hands are somewhat strapped,
Absolutely,
unfortunately, legally.
they're part of a process.
And they're part of a system, too.
There you go.
That has a lot of legalities around it that they have to consider.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't want to get sued.
And we appreciate, they don't want to get sued, and we appreciate that, right? But there's also, I think the level of questioning you're doing, or you did eventually, wasn't to question their knowledge and authority. It was more that if this is a trial, it's obviously not tested and 100% guaranteed. So therefore, what else could I or should I be doing if I don't want to die at the end of this trial? And by the way, may I just interject and ask, do you know how many people were on that trial with you on that first one?
There was a lot. I'm not
more
quite
than 100,
sure. Yeah.
More than 200?
Crikey, yeah, thousands
Okay.
And thousands worldwide.
Let's talk about then the trial itself with spartomicrolab plus chemotherapy tablets, and talk to me about how that was administered or what you were told and how the process went.
Yeah, well,
treatment.
Okay. So it's basically spartomicrolab, which was a drug of choice at that point, with obviously the chemo tablets. If we touch on them, I've explained what their shelf life is and what and I think again, I'm not completely au fait with this. Questions I should have asked at the time, but the actual reasoning for giving the chemo tablet, I think what it is to say, well, if we know this works. So if this starts to reduce his tumours, then we know that there's something positive going on here, and they can work with that. And don't hold a gun to my head and take that as given. I'm guessing here again. This is just what I've kind of my understanding is along the way. But that root system, if that keeps growing and grows into the bloodstream or gets into the bloodstream, and it has cancerous cells, then that's when it metastasizes. There's that word again. Right. Basically, it spreads. Once it gets into that bloodstream, it can go anywhere. And that's what they were fearful of, because it was that big. It was that deep, I should say. So they said, right, we need to MRIs, CTs, scans, basically, just to make sure that there's every chance, I should say, that this has spread into the system. Now they didn't. I suppose maybe they didn't want to scare, any scaremongering going on. They didn't want to worry me too much, but they never made it clear.
How serious?
Yeah, because as I say, there was no treatment.
Interesting.
And the prognosis, I think, is if it has metastasized at that time, you've got months. No, 6 months to a year, I think, something like that.
Interesting.
But I didn't quite know that at that point. But right. I do. Obviously, it's still, this isn't great.
Right.
And I remember having the scans and everything was all fine. Previous to that, even having the biopsies done and all of that, still mindset was fine. I was in a pretty good place.
Okay.
Life was just carried on as normal. But it wasn't until we were waiting for the scans results that the fear started to creep in.
So at this point, you've gone through a couple of rounds of rehab, and one round of rehab and several sessions of AA that ultimately haven't worked for you. And it sounds like you reached a really dark place, really dark moment in your life. And would you say that was sort of your rock bottom? Would you? Yeah,
I think that's a good way of putting it. I think, there's no really other way to dress it up. That was my rock bottom. I mean, they say everyone predominantly has their rock bottom within addiction. For whatever set of scenarios may bring you to that. But some people's rock bottom might be death. Yeah. As morbid as that might sound, that's unfortunately the bare hard facts of it all is, some people don't necessarily get to the luxury of hitting, if you can call it that,
Yeah.
but of hitting when they call it rock bottom, because there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
The only way is up.
Yeah.
So if there's a positive to be taken out of that in a weird sort of roundabout way, then I guess that's the only place you could kind of use it. But yeah, I would say that my rock bottom was where I literally had lost the will to live.
Okay.
I felt, again, it's important, and I don't mind repeating myself here because it is very important, that there was nowhere else to turn. I was useless. I'd lost, on the verge of losing everything, not quite at that point, but I was well on my way. I felt that I was nothing but a burden. I think that's probably the biggest part of it, is that I felt useless, and I'll be better out the way.
And of course you weren't, but that's how you felt.
Absolutely, 101%. Yeah. I'd gone into the real depths of despair. I just felt that there was just nowhere else to turn.
Yeah. Did you feel like you had failed? Sort of,
absolutely, yeah.
Failed your wife,
yeah.
failed your children, failed yourself, failed
yeah.
your family. That kind of like,
yeah. And there was no, as far as I could, the way that I felt at that point is there was nowhere else to go. There was no other hope. I tried the rehab. I tried AA. I'd, done pretty much as what I thought at the time was what it said on the tin, that there was nothing else to do. So I picked my spot. Typical addict. Not doing anything half-heartedly. It was I really did kind of plan it all out.
Premeditated.
Very well and truly premeditated. I picked my spot, and I went back the following day. In fact, when I look, it's quite difficult actually when I consider what kind of mindset now, in reflection of where I was. It's quite frankly unbelievable. Is that I got myself into a situation which was where I was so low that I considered leaving my children. And never to see them again. And my wife at the time, albeit it wasn't a particularly good thing, we were really going through it. But yeah, I thought they'd be better without me.
Yeah.
So as I say, I picked my spot the day before. Then that late afternoon, early evening, I took my boys to football training, dropped them off, stood there with them for about 15 minutes, talking to the other parents, the usual conversations as we do, and then said, "Well, I'll be back soon." And I'd written a note, and I left the note on the chair. I drank half a bottle of vodka, which, funnily enough, which was a bit of a weird one for me. It was the only drink I'd actually had that day, so I was sober at that point when I took that half a bottle. And what I did is I planned, there's a tree, a big oak tree that was my target. So I'd worked out that I was going to basically aim at that tree and hit that tree at high speed. And so that was the agenda. So that's exactly what I did. Probably about 60 mile an hour. I left the curb. At that point, I flicked my seatbelt off. I can remember going through what seemed to be, a bit like for the brambles and through, ditches and all sorts. And then the next thing I can remember was I could hear sirens, and I was lying in the middle of the road. I'd been thrown from the car because I took my seatbelt off, and it threw me through the side window.
The side window.
Yeah, out the side window. And I can remember the one thing that sticks with me, and it always will do, unsurprisingly, I guess, is I remember I think it was a fire engine or fireman saying DOA, which is
dead on arrival.
Yeah. So,
oh my gosh.
And obviously, I'm hello.
You're like, no, you're
still
hearing
here.
it. Yeah.
But I can remember them. I remember cutting my clothes off anyway.
So your eyes are closed when you heard this. Obviously, they wouldn't have said. Yeah. So you were.
Yeah,
wow.
I broke my neck, and I broke my neck in 3 places. I broke my back, I think, in 3 places.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And obviously it was quite. I've got a scarring on the forehead now, which is where I went through the glass.
Okay.
Which I look in the mirror and that reminds me every day.
Yeah.
In a good way, weirdly enough.
Yeah.
We'll come on to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so obviously I'd survived.
Oh my gosh.
And
Broken your back in 3 places.
back and neck.
And neck.
Yeah, so six fractures or breaks, whatever you want to call it. In total, yeah. So
that's enough to be a death sentence right there. So, but you survived.
Yeah, how they don't know to this day. How you your higher power.
You have
whatever.
You still have a purpose on earth.
Yeah, absolutely.
You still have something you need to achieve,
and that's something we'll definitely come on to.
Yeah.
Purpose. I think I really believe that. Yeah, so do I. I think it's quite a powerful thing. But yeah, so I obviously went through that process. I spent a week in hospital. And then I was released. I had a 5-minute consultation with a so-called expert, and they basically ticked all the boxes and said, right, go home, carry on.
No, you need to go to psychotherapy. No,
nothing.
You need counselling. No, you need help.
Exactly. No, there was none of that. I'm just saying it as it is. This isn't. I'm not trying to be detrimental here to the services.
Yeah, no, but it's an important part because I think there's a deeper level of recognition.
I agree.
That needs to occur on multiple levels, and this is one of them. Yeah. This is one of many.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. These.
Sure, they're overburdened.
They're overburdened.
Absolutely, and ultimately, yeah. But to just hint at something doesn't take more than 30 seconds.
No. Well, I think it was just, as I said, it was ticking boxes.
Yeah.
Are you still having suicidal thoughts? No, I'm fine. Can I go home now? Right. Okay. Well, we need to tick these boxes first. It was very much regimental. It was, reading from a script, and as long as you answered the questions that they were putting in front of you, you could go home.
Good.
But I knew that in my heart of hearts that things weren't
anything but fine.
Far from fine.
Yeah, and in fact, what are the?
Yeah.
What about using that word?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as I said, I went through that process. I was released, back home to heal a bit longer. But even within the space of a few days, I was back drinking again.
Yeah.
So, albeit that was my rock bottom, I hadn't bounced. I hadn't started to make my ascent, so to speak. I was still swimming down there with the lower fishes, if you want a better phrase. But anyhow, so I carried on with the drinking, and
was there a level of pain that you were processing during this time too? Physical pain from the injuries?
Not really.
You were on pain meds, I presume. Was anybody saying you should stay off alcohol because you're on pain medication?
No, well, I was on morphine the whole time I was in, which again, something that we can talk about. But
which for an addict is
not ideal.
Yeah.
And that happened to me even when at later stages when I had the pleural infusion where they removed the fluid from the lungs. Again, I was back on morphine then, but again, we'll address that at a later date. But yeah, no. So I was released, sent home, recovered, and then pretty much carried on where I left off. But that's when I was introduced to Mark White, who a very good friend of his, actually like a brother to me. Love him to bits. And he basically took me under his wing as being my sponsor, and started to work with me on the 12-step program. But he could tell that I just wasn't engaging properly. I was talking the talk, but not walking it really. I was just, going through the motions. And he could tell that my drinking was gradually getting worse. And that's when he advised that I should be we need to look at a different rehabilitation for you and try something different. And that was where, between my ex-wife and my parents and Mark and a few other people, it's decided that we would go to this other centre in Watford. I'm not sure it's actually there anymore, Castleberry. But anyhow, but that's where we decided that we would go. It's a very kind of spiritual program, which I wasn't quite sure about at the time. And they decided that it was 3 months. So initially I did 3 weeks in the first bout, but this time it was a little bit more serious. You know,
were you, sorry, just to interject there for a second, because the spiritual aspect is quite important. Did you have any connection with spirituality before doing rehab? You know,
So,
had you grown up with faith? Had you grown up religious, been introduced to? No, not really.
No, I hadn't. No, but I'd always had spiritual tendencies.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that there's like Buddhism always interested me. A lot of philosophy interested me. Some of the way of life. Obviously, as I say, in the first bout of rehab, we did a bit about mindfulness, which resonated with me anyway. Meditation, I learned a little bit about as well. So I started to take an interest in it, but I never committed.
Sure.
And the funny thing is with me, and again, you know, this is we're talking about, you know, which we will in more detail about, you know, our own truth, you know, and looking within and working on what works best for you.
Yeah.
That's kind of it was around about then that I realised that there was more to it.
Okay.
There's more part of my makeup that was more in tune with that side of life, if you like, than not. It was, and every time I kind of wandered away from that path, you know, even with AA, there's some introductory stuff towards it. But every time I kind of turned my back on it and thought, well, I'll go through a certain process of it, get interested with it, talk about it, and then walk away again. Mm-hmm. And every time something always happened. Yeah. Something come into play.
Something negative, you mean?
Something negative, yeah. Exactly.
Almost like you're veering off the path.
100%.
And it was correcting your course,
and it was
by giving you signs.
Kick me up the backside to get me back on that path again. And as I say, every time I wandered away from the path, veered off path.
Yeah, figuratively.
Something we put it back on. Yeah.
So do you feel like you were aware of that when those occurrences, when those negative things happen in your life? Like, oh, there it is again, telling me. Or can you look at that now in hindsight only?
I can look at that now in hindsight.
Yeah.
I'm blessed to say that I can do that now.
I've had similar experiences, which is why I ask you, because I think it's wonderful to have that level of self-awareness, because then you can take those signs as actually gifts. But when you don't have that level of awareness, you go, oh, why me? Why is it happening again? You know?
Yeah.
And when you actually acknowledge that, wait, this is happening because I'm not on the right path. This is actually a sign helping me correct course. This is not a punishment. This is actually, or it could feel like a punishment, right? But like, it's not like poor me punishment. It's like, you did it wrong again, get back on that path. And I think that's a really important distinction, because when you're in that addict mindset, you're in the very much the poor me mindset, right? Poor me, pour me a drink, like you said earlier. Whereas when you're in recovery and a level of self-awareness that is heightened, you can acknowledge the difference between adversity punishing you versus adversity giving you a sign to get back on course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's at least how I feel about it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think that's a good way of putting it. But
so you had these adversities come your way, and at the time you didn't recognize it, but looking back you can. And what did that do? Sort of, was it, you know, were you facing these adversities and challenges drinking again, or no?
So obviously by the time I got into rehab, for the second time, this was a completely different experience. Yeah. I mean, these guys stripped me bare, took me right back to basics, and then rebuilt me up again. Yeah. But
stripped you bare literally or figuratively?
No, figuratively.
Okay, no, just because sometimes they do actually make sure you can't self-harm, so they actually strip you bare physically, because they want to make sure you're not hiding any razors or anything else that will harm yourself.
Funny enough, well, they do that.
So
they do that.
So they check you when you
before
first come
you go in.
They
check your bags to make sure you're not stashing or hiding anything. Yeah, I mean, you're treated like a child initially. Yeah. And you deserve that to a degree.
To a degree,
people might challenge that,
with dignity.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go.
But yes, let's just make sure you're safe.
Absolutely. So manage with kid gloves is probably a better way of putting it.
Sure.
But yeah, so they stripped me bare, and it was when I say spiritual, it was quite enlightening. It wasn't all godly as such. I mean, a lot of the places can be. There was certainly a strong element of that.
Yeah.
They talk about quotes from the Bible and certain aspects, but it was more to do with the spiritual way. Whether that be the Buddhist philosophies or any other kind of
Spirituality.
yes, any kind of other kind of spiritual practices or ways. Exactly. They kind of they didn't shove it down your throat. They didn't drum it into you as such, but it was all part of the practice every day. So every day you're going, and there was a lot of meditation and mindfulness, again bringing that mindfulness back in, but meditation was really key. We did a lot of meditational work, which really
was that challenging?
No, absolutely, it was the opposite.
Amazing. Okay.
That resonated with me straight off the bat.
Yeah.
And that, as soon as I'd had my first, amazing.
Well, some people who need it most really struggle with it, actually.
Yeah.
People who are kind of let their mind race, or whose minds race, I should say, not let their mind race, but they can really struggle with sitting still because they go, this isn't a workout. What's it doing for me? But actually sitting still is exactly what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sitting with their discomfort with themselves.
100%.
So it's interesting that you took to it right away.
Yeah. Again, there's not many that did. There was a few that just couldn't. Again, I think ego kicked in a lot. Yeah. I can't sit here in this, mudra position of, this pose. It just doesn't, listen to this music or chanting which is a little bit of that going on as well. Not so much. I mean, that was more as I came out. But anyhow, came out of rehab. But again, I'm sure we'll come. Spirituality is a big aspect of what we're going to be talking about. So
yeah.
But again, it worked for me, and it resonated with me. The meditation sides, there was a lot that, it sort of a bit of a coming home. Mm-hmm. It just felt, part of my makeup.
Okay.
So I
it resonated.
It resonated, as I say. Yeah, strong. So I kind of acted on that, and I was meditating more than most. I.e., whereas most would just stick with the class, like a 2-hour meditation in the morning. I would do that, and then when everyone was having their lunch, whatever, I'd go back to my room and carry on. And I took
solace in it.
I did, yeah. I just, well put. I took comfort in it. There was a lot. It calmed me. It switched off the addict mind, so to speak. It stopped me overthinking. It stopped me, talking to myself about, why I'm not good enough or what I should do to make myself better. All of these, battles that the addict mind kind of goes through on a daily basis. It seemed to suppress a lot of that, and I kind
Powerful.
of, absolutely was incredibly.
Any particular type of meditation that you practiced during that time?
Multiple different types. Okay. The Vipassana meditation, there was all different types. Okay. I mean, even sometimes just sitting in silence and walking barefoot. We did a lot of outdoor work as well, which was amazing. Getting that connection with the ground and all of that stuff.
Itself.
Grounding, etc. Yeah, something I now do on a regular basis.
Very important for everyone.
I think so.
Yeah.
Again, we'll come on to all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that that resonated with me. I'll say it again, but it's worth it because it's that important. So obviously there was the benefits of that. So I thought, okay, well, I want to take this a little bit further. So I started to, took more of an interest into the spiritual way. I started to read up a little bit more about it. I was asking more questions. They took us to a Krishna retreat, which was absolutely amazing.
And where was that? Was that here in
that's in
country?
Watford. No, okay. It was it's actually George Harrison. When he passed, in his will, he left his house, his estate, to the Krishna Society.
Amazing.
And they all live in that. It's now a temple. And I can remember going in there and seeing all the guys in there, and it's a bit daunting to start with. You've got the Christians in their gowns and their mala beads, and they're walking around counting and chanting. And, and it interested me. I was like, I like, there's something about it that clicked. But anyhow, so I was doing that on a very regular basis. And that stuck with me. I did the 3 months in rehab. I came out of there, and this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because there's a thing that they call, it's called the pink cloud effect, which is where you come out of rehab or you've had, say, 6 months of sobriety. You think you know it all. You're on the pink cloud. Everyone's smiling. The world's amazing.
You've done it.
You've done it. I've beat this.
You beat it.
I know everything.
You've gotten to the end of it. You finished it.
Exactly. I'll just go and live a normal life now. So how wrong could I be? So again,
do they warn you about that?
Yes, pink cloud was a big thing. Okay. It was quite well spoken about in the rooms of AA as well as in this second bout of rehab. There's a warning signs, and if they pick up on it, they're like they will address it.
Yeah.
We need to take this back a step. You need to,
go through.
You're getting too cocky. Yeah. Basically with this, and you're running before you can walk.
Yeah, you're missing a step if you've gotten that far.
Again, you work on your gratitude, your humility, all of that stuff. Keep you grounded. So I was very blasé. I come out, I was talking the talk, I was preaching to everyone, about look at me, I'm Mr. Spiritual and all of that stuff. And I slowly started to slip back into our behaviour.
Wow. How slowly, as in over the course of weeks, months?
Yeah, weeks, months, probably year. Within a year, I think it's fair to say that I had pretty much dropped most of my spiritual practices and tendencies. I'd gone back into work mode. I set up another company. I was actively. Oh, by the way, I guess it's worth one thing I should say that, which we'll come on to as part of further discussions. But while I was in rehab is when my first wife filed for divorce.
Oh right. While you're in rehab, while
I was in rehab,
the second one,
yeah.
That ended up being 3 months because you said you started off with 3 weeks. It was supposed to be 3 months, but you started off with 3 weeks to see how it was going to go.
No. That's sorry. So the initial.
Sorry, did I mishear? Yeah.
No, that's cool. So basically, the first rehab was 3 weeks.
Oh, right. Okay.
The first bout of rehab was 3. The second one was
3
3 months, and I was in for 3, and I weren't going anywhere.
You're right. It was longer. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when I came out, I was talking the talk but not walking the walk, as I say. So the practice started to slip, and over the course of months, say a year, within that sort of time frame, I'd pretty much forgotten all of it. Yeah. So during the rehabilitation was when my wife at the time filed for divorce, which is a bit of a bombshell, but looking back now, there's no resentment at all. There was at the time. I can strongly say that. How dare you do that to me while I'm in here? Right. There's all of that poor me scenario coming back into play. But anyhow, right. I've put those demons to bed a long time ago. But anyhow.
No, but it's an important point because, you wonder to what extent, did you pick up drinking afterwards again?
No, yeah. So the bout in rehab had certainly done what I'd hoped it would do.
Amazing.
It got me sober.
Okay.
And albeit, as I say, I started to step away again from the spiritual way, I was still remained sober. I put as I say, splitting up, my wife divorce was going through. I was in the process of setting up the new company. I'd found a new place to live because, as I say, we lost the house. I was pretty much homeless. I was homeless because I refused to go and live back with my parents because I felt that would be a step backwards. Okay. For my mindset. I was very conscious that if I was back in that environment, I could slip further back into old behaviour, become more dependent upon them. I thought I've got to make a clean break.
Okay.
I've got to start again. So I actually ended up in a hostel and spent a year at that hostel, which was a big wake-up call.
1 year.
Yeah, a year. But you know what? There was my gratitude. Yeah. Because...
It's humbling.
Yeah, absolutely, was it?
To go from a big home to then a hostel.
Big house, all the cars and all of that stuff that I thought was that important.
Yeah.
And I can tell you now, hand on heart, that being in that environment, that helped keep me. It got me well and helped keep me well because, as I say, that's where I could see it. That's where gratitude come into play, and humility, as you rightly say. And and I thought to myself, yeah, I'm starting from scratch here.
Yeah.
I've had everything taken away through my own devices. It's hands up. It's all my own doing. I take full responsibility
Sure.
for
Yeah.
everything that's gone on.
Yeah.
It's no one else's fault but my own. But I could see, this was my new way of life.
Yeah.
I'd broken my ties. I'd stepped away from the influences that that got me unwell and that I felt that were keeping me unwell. I kind of shelved a lot of that stuff, pulled away from it, was introducing stuff that some of my toolbox that I'd been learning from when I was in at rehab. And as I say, I started to find my feet again. But I mean, really, what's really important, and I keep saying it, but the spiritual tendencies had lapsed. So those practices of meditation, everything else had gone completely out the window. But I felt well. I was still in a good place. I didn't consider drinking at all. There wasn't one moment where I thought, actually, I could do with a drink today. Or, in an environment where I'm thinking, actually, I'm going to feel a lot better if I have a drink now because, it's going to make this situation a lot easier to deal with. That I was managing with. I could deal with that now.
So you felt like, okay, you've dealt with the addiction and you had already dealt with the first bout of cancer. So suddenly you feel like everything's okay except for losing the house and obviously your wife. So did things like feel like they were getting better?
Yeah. There's something they say in the rooms is you'd be surprised what miracles come into play when you get sober. And it's so true. Things just start to becoming just out of nowhere. People resonate towards you that will help you. Yeah. I suppose it's because you're trying. I mean, again, the spiritual aspects which we'll come into is about energy work and I felt that what we project, we receive. Is energy is energy, and we attract what energy we're resonating at. Yeah. So if you raise your vibration and you're vibrating at a higher frequency, that's what you're going to attract. Yeah. And so that's where, again, as I say, the miracles, the magic starts to happen. Inquiries for work start to come through. A bit of good luck. Oh, I was in the hostel, and then I got a letter through to say, "Oh, we've found you a flat." Just little snippets, little tiny things, but because you've been on your arse, because you've been knocked so rock bottom, even when you had everything, you had nothing. Right. That just the smallest things you took pride in, or gratitude in. Yeah. It was humbling, but you could appreciate it. It's like I lost my license. I mean, one thing about, again, going back to the suicide thing, I'm going a little bit back and forth here, but it's worth mentioning this point, is that as I did touch on it, that I was actually hadn't drunk that day, albeit until I drank half a bottle of vodka. Until that moment, yeah. Now, I was sober when the incident happened. So because the alcohol hadn't taken effect yet. Exactly. Because you just had it. Yeah. So I did it because I didn't think I'm going to be here. Wow. So I've necked it thinking, okay, do that. Right. Maybe that'll ease the pain. Yeah. Which is what his job was. Like this, that's what the alcohol was there for, to numb everything. But anyhow, so the accident took place, or incident, I should say, took place. And I was breathalyzed at the scene, and I was sober. Oh my goodness. So they recorded it as you being sober at the time. But then when I got to hospital and they did the bloods, I was through the roof, 3 times over the limit. Yeah, of course. And I lost my license. I had to go to court when I was in rehab. So I think it's worth that we bring that back into play. Yeah. But so I lost my license, which meant I was having to get the bus everywhere. Hardship? A little bit. Initially to start with, but I got used to it. In fact, I quite enjoyed it. Humbling moment. But I had to get up because I started this new position. I was setting up a new company, and I had to travel into London a lot, so I had to be up a couple of hours earlier to make sure I got the right bus to get me to the station, to get the right train, etc., etc. So again, it was it was tough to start with, but then I appreciated everything else a lot more, because then when I got my license back, and then I got myself a little KA,
you realised what you'd lost.
And
therefore what you had before you lost it.
Absolutely. And that's why, again, I can't reiterate how important gratitude is.
Gratitude. Well, this is it, right? We always think, oh, poor me. And it's like, well, actually, how poor are you?
Yeah.
You know, some really are, right? Some genuinely are. They really have nothing. But reality is that you usually have something that you can be grateful for that you are probably missing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A lot of things, in fact.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. But, so anyhow, there's all the gratitude stuff we just talk about, i.e. with, the losses.
Yeah.
But then obviously the gains, getting back into everyday way of life again. But those tendencies still weren't, those spiritual tendencies that were always there were still being pushed away.
Yeah.
Still, I don't need that now. I'm moving on with my life.
You felt fine.
Yeah.
You're slowly getting better, slowly getting back into things.
Back feeling good. You know, all the positives were happening.
Yeah.
Because I was sober,
Mm-hmm.
making all the right noises, but there was still a lot of the old me there.
Yeah. Were you well?
No.
Yeah.
It was all a smoke screen.
Mm.
I wasn't drinking, but I wasn't right, because I hadn't embraced my true self. There's something they say in the rooms is you'd be surprised what miracles come into play when you get sober.
Mm.
And it's so true. Things just start to becoming just out of nowhere. People resonate towards you that will help you.
Yeah.
I suppose it's because you're again, the spiritual aspects, which we'll come into, is, about energy work and I felt that what we project, we receive. Is energy is energy, and we attract what energy we're resonating at. So if you raise your vibration and you're vibrating at a higher frequency, that's what you're going to attract. Yeah. And so that's where, again, as I say, the miracles, the magic starts to happen. Inquiries for work start to come through. A bit of good luck. Oh, I was in the hostel, and then I got a letter through to say, oh, we've found you a flat. Just little snippets, little tiny things, but because you've been on your ass, because you've been knocked so rock bottom, even when you had everything, you had nothing. Right. That just the smallest things you took pride in, or gratitude in. Yeah. It was humbling, but you could appreciate it. It's like, I lost my license. I mean, one thing about, again, going back to the suicide thing, going a little bit back and forth here, but it's worth mentioning this point, is that as I did touch on it, that I was actually hadn't drunk that day, albeit until I drank half a bottle of vodka.
Until that moment, yeah.
Now, I was sober when the incident happened. So
because the alcohol hadn't taken effect yet. Exactly. Because you just had it.
Yeah. So I did it because I didn't think I'm going to be here. Wow. So I've necked it thinking, oh, okay, do that. Right. Maybe that'll ease the pain. Yeah. Which is what his job was. Like this, that's what the alcohol was there for, to numb everything. But anyhow, so the accident took place, or incident, I should say, took place. And I was breathalyzed at the scene, and I was sober.
Oh my goodness. So they recorded it as you being sober
at the time. But then when I got to hospital and they did the bloods, I was
through the roof,
3 times over the limit. Yeah, of course. And I lost my license. I had to go to court when I was in rehab. So I think it's worth that we bring that back into play. Yeah. But so I lost my license, which meant I was having to get the bus everywhere.
Hardship?
A little bit. Initially to start with, but I got used to it. In fact, I quite enjoyed it.
Humbling moment.
But I had to get up because I started this new position. I was setting up a new company, and I had to travel into London a lot, so I had to be up a couple of hours earlier to make sure I got the right bus to get me to the station, to get the right train, etc., etc. So again, it was tough to start with, but then I appreciated everything else a lot more, because then when I got my license back, and then I got myself a little KA,
you realised what you'd lost.
And therefore
what you had before you lost it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And And that's why, again, I can't
Yeah.
reiterate how important gratitude is.
Gratitude. Well, this is it, right? We always think, oh, poor me. And it's like, well, actually, how poor are you?
Yeah.
You know, some really are, right? Some genuinely are. They really have nothing. But reality is that you usually have something that you can be grateful for that you are probably missing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A lot of things, in fact.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. But, so anyhow, there's all the gratitude stuff we just talk about, i.e. with, the losses.
Yeah.
But then obviously the gains, getting back into everyday way of life again. But those tendencies still weren't, those spiritual tendencies that were always there were still being pushed away.
Yeah.
Still, I don't need that now. I'm moving on with my life.
You felt fine.
Yeah.
You're slowly getting better, slowly getting back into things.
Back feeling good. You know, all the positives were happening.
Yeah.
Because I was sober,
Mm-hmm.
making all the right noises, but there was still a lot of the old me there.
Yeah. Were you well?
No.
Yeah.
It was all a smoke screen.
Mm.
I wasn't drinking,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't right because I hadn't embraced my true self.
Mm.
And it wasn't until...
You're on the path towards it, perhaps, but not there yet.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the second diagnosis brought into play.
So in this next episode, we're going to talk about how Adrian faced a second cancer diagnosis and the 4 stages of treatment he went through after that. I look forward to having you join us for that discussion.